think there is more than one way to play any chord progression, and I think the best way to find out all of the ways to play a given chord progression is to understand all the various chord forms. Dyads, which are two-part chords, triads, which are three-part chords, tetrads, pentads, hexads, 4, 5, and 6-part chords. I don't call them that, nobody does, I don't think. But all that nerdy stuff aside, understanding that there are groups of notes that make up these various chords, and the fact that those notes can be inverted, aka inversions, that will allow you to unlock the fretboard completely and allow you to take a very normal sounding progression and spice it up any way you see fit. So maybe something like this. Something like this. What about this? As you can guess, there are endless amounts of combinations you can use in a given chord progression depending on what the quality of the chord is, meaning is it major or minor, and then taking liberties with those tonalities to make them as jazzy or as rock or as metal as you want to make them. So that begs the question, how do you create such interesting chord progressions out of seemingly simple music? Well, the answer lies within understanding intervals, which I've mentioned a million times in all my other videos, but understanding what a root note is, what a third and a fifth and a seventh, understanding those relationships and how they work together to make up various chords. All of this stuff is outlined in my course, Guitar Super System, which is linked down below if you're interested, but I'm going to give you a brief overview and help you understand by playing a bunch of different examples, so that way you can get a glimpse into what these various sounds have to offer. So we'll use this super simple progression that I was using earlier, which is E minor, D, C. So in order to make this more interesting, there's a few things we can do. We can A, choose to add an extra interval. So right now I'm just using triads, which are just 3-note chords, root, third, and fifth. And I can play those triads in different spots on the neck. So now that I have that basic understanding, I can add an interval. So after a fifth would be a seventh, so that's the logical next step to take. So the first thing I want to do is figure out which seventh I want to add. In this case, it's going to be a minor seventh because the key of E minor has this flat 7 note. So as I can see here, I want to add a D to this chord. So I can find a D right there by removing this redundant E note. So now I have an E minor 7 chord. So we went from E minor to E minor 7. Doesn't sound that much different, does it? Well, we're going to take care of that by voicing it in a new way. So what I'm going to do is take all the notes of the E minor 7 chord, which is E, B, D, and G, and I'm going to stack those up in a new way. So instead of the E on top, we are going to put, let's do the G. And then we're going to stack up the subsequent notes. So we want G, D, and now we still need our E here, and our B. So at first we had this E minor 7. Now we have what's called a drop 2 chord. You don't have to remember that. But it's the same notes of an E minor 7 chord, just inverted. So now we have access to this sound. We don't necessarily have to begin it with this. We can actually just start here if we want. Alright, now that we've spiced up that E minor chord, let's take a look at the D chord. Now we just have a triad again. So let's figure out this context. It seems like that is the key of G major. So in the key of G major, this chord is a dominant chord. So I can immediately take my 4-part chord approach. So let's break this down. If you're familiar with basic music theory, you'll understand that in order to determine the key of a chord progression, you need to look at their relationships. So I can see is derived from the key of G major. Obviously, E minor being the natural minor of G major. So if any of what I just said doesn't make sense to you, then check out Guitar Super System, link down below, and you'll understand all the jargon I just used. But like I said, we're gonna move on at this pace, and whether or not you have a solid foundation in music theory, you will be able to hear exactly what it is I'm explaining as I go through these various chords. So since I know these chords are derived out of the key of G major, I know that D, the next chord that we're gonna be looking at to make more interesting, is actually a dominant 7th chord in the key of G major. So here's the key of G major in chord form. There's our D. So I am going to take this shape and add this note here. This is where my interval knowledge comes into play. I'm adding a B to this D7 chord. So just for context here, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And since this is beyond an octave here, this B note is actually a 13. So we have a D13 chord. So the original chord progression, we remember, was this. And then we amended that E minor to an E minor 7 and changed its inversion to get this. And now we're going to come down to this D13. So all of a sudden, this chord relationship changed to this. Now, if that's not more interesting, then just shut this video off right now because we're not seeing eye to eye. All right, finally, we got the C chord. And in the key of G major, it is a major 7 chord. Now, I'm going to use kind of a similar approach that I did with the first chord and take a drop 2. I'm going to take this root position C major 7 chord, which is C, G, B, E, and I'm going to invert that. So we have E on top this time, the minor 3rd. Here is our B, and then we have C and G. These drop 2 inversions are really awesome sounding, as you can tell. So taking one step back, we had that, and now putting this all together, we have this. It doesn't even sound like the same chord progression anymore. So if you want to preserve some of that classic sound, you can take the chord, whatever might be throwing you off. In this case, I think it might be that last one. Yeah, so this one almost sounds like a minor chord, even though it is, in fact, a major 7 chord. So what I would say is just keep it a little traditional with a nice triad, root position triad here for the C, and then stack another triad on top. So we have this root position, and then we have another one on top, so we have this. So our chord progression becomes this. Still don't really like that. Let's change the C again. I know from experience that one of my favorite sounds in a major chord is the 9. So in this case, it would be a D. So let's see if we can figure out how to put a D into this chord shape. So it would be a C add 9 that we're looking for. So I really like this shape where I can put my D right here. I think that might be the resolution we're looking for. Let's try it. So through the facilitation of various chord types, from triads to 4-part chords and extra intervals added on to certain chord types based on theory knowledge, we were able to create some pretty interesting stuff out of a very basic sounding chord progression. That was only the tip of the iceberg on how far we could have gone with just those 3 chords. We could have put 3 different types of E minor chords in a measure and gotten away with it, and we could do that for any one of those chords, not even to mention little filler licks. So here's our E minor. There's our D. There's our C. Infinite possibilities. This is only the surface. Getting started with figuring out how to do stuff like this always begins with understanding intervals. So we have our root, we have our third of some kind, a fifth of some kind, and then after that it's all different colors. That root, third, and fifth I consider to be like the base canvas that you can jump from. And you can learn all about this, as I've said, ad nauseum in Guitar Super System, which is linked down below. I highly recommend it, and I think that just a little bit of this goes a long way. Obviously this whole video is embellishing. I'm not like trying to be some too cool for school jazz guy. That's not really my style, but I do think it's really fun to explore possibilities when you're maybe trying to just spice up a chord progression, even in just one measure. So this can really expand the landscape of your guitar playing and the sounds that you're able to create. And it really doesn't take a ton of effort to get used to these different chords. It's just a matter of knowing that they exist and then experimenting with how to put them together and what works, what doesn't work. Trust me, I've tried a lot and I've found a lot of stuff that doesn't really work. But it's all good. It's all about having fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this little glimpse into creating more interesting, I think, chord progressions. Keep shredding. I'll see you next time.